I had to go and get my clock so I can see what time it is. What time it is while we're living. There we go. That should work. Because I always start these lives and I don't do it when I have a clock anywhere nearby. And then, I don't know, where I have to actually ask people on the live what time it is. Because you can't see it on your phone once your phone gets going. So, here I am. We're setting up for some live patchworking. I've got my little patchwork kit. Margate Girl patchwork kit. Still only £15. I think I need to put that up because the pre-order's over. So if you want a kit and you haven't had one yet, you're gonna know. Patchworking kit. And we were gonna call this a quilting kit. Oh, hi everyone coming in. Just gonna give some waves. I've got a new little setup in my studio. I've got a new kind of like boom arm. That means I can have it clipped to my table. So now we're at my sideboard in the studio, which is where I keep all the haberdashery and all like the really fun, you know, cards and things like that. Important stuff. Fun birthday cards and groovy pencils. So this is where I am. But I'm actually in the process of, and I think I'm going to get to finally start it tonight. I'm going to just plug it in the iron. Anyone who's patchworking with their kit tonight, get your iron plugged in. Round about now. I mean, you could leave it later, but the fact is it kind of warms up the room as well, doesn't it? If you're in a cold studio like me, that's kind of handy. So round the other side of this wall is my little office, which I'm hardly ever in because, let's face it, not a very professional person, much more into the making. So I am now going to be, I'm going to be turning that office space into a little film studio, a very little film studio. I'm going to be doing that probably as of tonight onwards. So on Sunday, when I do another one of these lives, I think I'll probably be around there. I was like shopping for cool chairs earlier today. Not in person, I was doing it online. But yeah, gonna have a little film studio where I'm gonna be doing all of the making. And I've designed it so that I'm gonna have like a desk in front of me and a comfy sofa or a big chair. I was talking to my brother about it and I was like, wow, in tutorials, do people sit at a desk or do we be in a comfy armchair? But I kind of want to be in something comfy that I can like really squidge down into while we do all of our crafts. So I thought that'd be pretty cool. So that's what's happening. I'm going to be doing building a design studio in my studio. Building a film studio in my studio so that I can do more of these lives really well furnished. Don't have to set up in front of my haberdashery cabinet. So tonight we're working with the patchwork kit. And as usual, I haven't really had to prepare much at all because everything you need is in this kit. You pretty much just need an iron, which is like, envy, look how grubby mine is. Need an iron, a good looking iron, and, oh, what's happening there? You need an iron, a level ironing board, oh, that's why it's on that, and a pair of scissors, and a tape measure. I think that's everything, but if we need anything else, I'll sort of discover as I go and run off into my studio to get it. You're also going to need something nice to drink, and maybe some crisps because you haven't got any dinner yet. So get yourself furnished, get yourself feeling good. We're going to do some patchworking. So give me a little hello in the chat box. If you have got one of these kits already, give me an orange heart because they're orange boxes. Bad idea getting crisps for a live. Sorry guys. In the future I should make sure it's like lovely delicious pieces of fruit. Although you'll get all the ASMR, won't you? Me crunching away while I sew. That's probably double ASMR therapy, isn't it? Crunchy sounds and the slow, repetitive motion of sewing. We'll be in heaven. So, patchwork kits. Give me an orange heart if you've got yours. Cindy's got hers, and I think Cindy, you're like a patchwork pro, aren't you, in quilting? So you can probably school us a bit. And I was saying earlier, I found it quite interesting naming this kit because I was like, I'm going to do a quilting kit because I'm so into quilts at the moment. There's a long load of reasons for that, including my very dear friend Lois. We had a good conversation about the quilts that we own and I was like, I've got this one, and she was showing me the one that her mum made her, and I'd just been off to the quilt, well, it wasn't a quilt exhibition, it was an exhibition called We Will Walk at Turner Contemporary, and it was all about sort of essentially Black history. It's really amazing, and protest and kind of the the resilience of the black community. And it was such a beautiful exhibition, and in it they had loads of quilts, patchwork quilts from Gee's Bend, which is a particular part of America, where their home craft is synonymous with their kind of culture, and they have beautiful quilts that are like strip quilts that are made using scraps of fabric that are just kind of stitched onto cloth and then bound with padding and wadding. So I was like, I gotta get making quilts, I love them so much. And in the next couple of weeks I'm going to be posting more fantastic quilt makers that I love as well. I'm going to be putting that on Margate Girl. Where's the time? That's the thing. So, patchworking kit tonight, and I'll get straight on with it, she says, after talking for like 10 minutes. Actually, I'll keep that nearby. Where should we put that? Let's put that here. Let's put that on there so we can all see what we're doing. It's very dusty in here. Okay, so I'm going to do the kit. This is what I love about these kits. Patchwork kit. Let's grab those instructions out and I'm going to read through them. Quilting, quilt blocks and patchwork are all terms that you might hear in a conversation about pieced together cloth blankets. The sewing together of small bits of fabric, patchwork, to make a blanket is often achieved by doing one small design square, a block, and I've included some blocks in this, but have I got it to hand? No, I think it's still at home. There are also so many different types of block design that you can make. I've done super simple ones, and you can see some of the outcomes here. There's the outcome of one of them, and there's the outcome of another that I'm currently still stitching. I've got like half-made ones of these. But the quilt blocks, meaning the blocks of design work that you can do from patchworking pieces together, are so broad. Like, there's thousands, and they're really, really, they have a really, really rich cultural history, and so many kind of different designs that mean different things. It's amazing. Like, the world of quilting is really incredible, and probably one of the longest serving types of composition craft. Like, lots of types of textile design and manufacture are very contemporary, but quilting goes right back, and patchworking, using those scraps and being really economical with your fabrics, it's amazing. And we should still be doing more of that. Like, I'm glad patchworking's had a resurgence. So achieving to make a blanket is often achieved by doing one small design square, a block at a time, with the squares then sewn together along with layers of padding and backing fabric, which is quilting. So there's those three terms: the blocks, the quilting, which is actually when you combine patchworks together and kind of pad them and make them into a quilt, and patchworking itself is the fusion of all these scraps of fabric. From the abstract quilts of Gee's Bend, my fave, to paper piece quilts in Old England, patchwork objects represent a great deal of time, effort, and sometimes community too, because a lot of people will often, and I did think about, like, should we do a bit of this? They'll make lots and lots of squares like this, lots of quilting blocks, and they'll send them to each other and they'll stitch them together, and you can get quilts that have been made by entire families or entire communities. It's really amazing. Quilt creation is a mindful and steady craft. Okay, slow down, become more steady, get more mindful. I'm in a real vibe today after working very hard all week. That will give you the chance to sustainably use up old fabrics to create something comforting and personal for yourself or for a gift. You'll never bin old textiles again. Were we binning old textiles, Zoe? I don't think so. Buckets and buckets of fabric under my desk would suggest that I'm not ever binning fabric. But hey, we'll do it even less now. It's the fabric choices and colour combination that make quilts so very individual. To make your own quilt project, you'll need to be familiar with a few basics. So in order to get you started, this kit contains everything you need to practice, grow in confidence, and have the tools to begin your own. The contents make up a miniature quilt block. I just poked myself with a pin there. I've lost my place now. The contents make up a miniature quilt block with the instruction and materials to create and finish it just like a mini quilt. You'll have your own study piece. Importantly, it's the ability to go on to create your own heritage masterpiece afterwards that is the exciting part. Have fun and don't forget to share what you've made. And as ever, I would love to see the stuff that you guys get up to with quilts, particularly if a kit like this that's really, really basic lets you into all the kind of like beginner stuff. If that gets you a little bit back into quilting, or it gets you knowing a bit more enough to start your own quilt or start your own patchwork pieces, let me know, because I love that stuff. The main vibe of these kits always is to be about kind of showing people that things don't have to be elitist, and you don't have to be an expert to start anything. And I am okay at sewing, and I quite like all types of crafts, but I'm no expert in anything apart from probably screen printing. And so I design these kits as a bit of a novice, and I understand stuff, I get to know things a bit better, and then I create the kits in order to inform other people just like me. So I hope you guys get the vibe from that as well. But the important thing is to not feel like you've got to be perfect at something to give it a go, and certainly while you're learning it doesn't have to be perfect either. Okay, so today we're doing the patchwork kit, and I've got all my contents here. I'm going to show you guys. As ever, we're probably not going to finish the whole craft in the 45 minutes that I have left after saying hi and getting on to you guys, but that doesn't mean that we can't carry on this evening and share it online later on. I might finish a little quilt one today and then put it up later on and show you all, but I'll talk you through the stuff we've got in the kit. So to start with, we obviously have the instructions, and the instructions, double-sided, so it is a long one, this one, and a little bit of intro. They also include the block designs, the quilt blocks. So I've got one that's like, they're very geometric, they always are, but I've got one that's more diamond shaped with like kind of triangles and a square, and then this one is a bit more sort of like a parquet flooring a little bit, or suggestion of one. And down in the bottom I've indicated what they look like if you change the colours. So the kits don't have everything in them to make an entire quilt, that would just be too much. And they also don't have all the same colours. I included a lot of different types of fabric in the kit to make sure that when you make your design, it's going to look really multi, and your block will kind of like have areas of shadow and light. And I've shown there what happens when you rotate the blocks when you sew them together. So you won't be making all of these with this one little, you know, patch of patchwork, but it just goes to show even the composition of your blocks can do something dramatically different to the design, and I think that's really interesting. And then here in this one, if you rotate this, it stays exactly the same, but if you change out the panels of colour for different ones, you can see it makes a really different look. So I kind of like that for patchwork. It's like it totally belongs to the person that does it, because so rarely are two patchwork panels or even quilts the same, because they'll rely on what fabrics you have available, and they'll depend on the vibe that you were in, what kind of like fabrics you were picking that day. I think that's really interesting. Okay, so we've got our instructions in there, and in the kit, I dropped it on the floor, we've got a little wheel of sewing pins. There's all I know, dust everywhere. A little wheel of sewing pins. Can't see anything in this bright light studio. I've got a little bag with, and anyone that's just joined, we're going through the contents at the moment. I've got my wheel of pins. I've got a little bag that has a needle, a needle threading aid, because I love to put those in. Some bias binding to go around the edge of my quilting block in kind of like a navy, or some of them have cream or some of them have red. Buying up this stuff when we were in lockdown was very interesting, so there's a whole mix of all sorts of different shades. And then we've got some thread to sew with today. I went for white in these kits, which isn't gonna, it's gonna contrast with a lot of the fabrics in the kit, but and some of the bias binding, but to pick one colour to go with everything is a bit of a challenge, so we just went for white, and it matches perfectly with the very, very light backing cloth that I've got in the kit as well. Now that's the one that's a square, and it's slightly bigger than all the other ones. And we've got the fabrics for the kit. This is way more than you're going to need for your quilting block, but I've gone for kind of like some plain colours. That one there's a pink, even though it doesn't look like it, and some patterned ones. Got a nice floral there. And this one is a scrap of, and I think everyone's got some of this in their kit, it's a scrap of fabric that my fantastic friend Emrys printed years ago for his company, his fashion design company that he ran, Craft the Plant, and these are all hand printed in Margate. They're amazing, like a lovely polka dot, really cool. So when you're picking fabrics for your quilting or your patchworking, you don't have to pick tiny coordinate prints, but it's a really good idea to, because of course you're going to be doing these tiny designs. So if we had huge florals, you might only see like the corner of a leaf or a petal or something like that. So you really want to get stuff that's micro enough to be able to be seen in those little squares of patchwork. So we've got our fabric both for the back and the front in our kit, and also a nice bit of wadding to use when we're going to kind of like pad out. That's going to get sandwiched in between the patchwork that we do and the backing cloth and stitched all together. That's what quilting is. So you're kind of like, well, you're quilting something. You're kind of like making a padded sort of impressioned surface. And I've also included in the kits, the last thing that we've got in here is a really monster bit of interfacing to use to stiffen up your fabrics. Now, you don't always have to do that with your patchworking. Quite often people don't, but I figured that given that lots of beginners might be using these kits, the interfacing will stiffen up the fabric and it makes it just a bit easier to work with when you're cutting. If it's like flopping everywhere while you're sewing, it can be a bit of a challenge. So this way, it's nice and stiff. And when you're stitching, it kind of stays really rigid. You can iron it and it's nice and sharp and crisp. It makes it a lot easier to work with. So I figured with us all maybe starting out in patchworking, that might be a bit of a good idea. I'm going to put my little demo there. Okay, so let's see what our instructions say and we'll get started. First things first, you'll need to get prepared with access to a sharp pair of scissors, an iron and board here, and a pencil. Haven't got a pencil. Let me get a pencil. Don't forget to tune into the tutorial that we're filming over the weekend and going to put up onto YouTube, so the link is there. Pick one of the 2 block designs on the lilac pages. I'm going to go for this second one today with all the squares. And we're going to carefully cut out each shape. The kit has enough fabric for just one of these designs. It's probably got a bit more actually, but I wanted to be, manage expectations. But you can use another one with your own fabric. If you like, take a picture of the shape beforehand to remember how it combines. Okay, I'm not going to take a picture. I'm just simply going to hold it up and memorize it. All right, so we've got a little bit there. Okay, it's like a number of blocks that grow. Okay, so you'll spot that there's an A3 piece of iron-on interfacing in each kit. Oh, first we need to cut the shapes out. That's what we're doing. So I'm going to cut all of these shapes out with my scissors, nice and sharp. I'm not going to try and remember. Cut these shapes out and use each piece as a guide for cutting shapes from your interfacing. Don't forget to include a 1 centimetre edge on each shape when you cut out, as this will be your seam allowance. So I go on to explain that in the next instruction. If you think you'll forget the order that they sew back together, snap a photo of this page. And luckily down in the bottom I've got a little example of the blocks as well, so that's quite handy. Okay, so I'm going to cut these shapes out. Would have been good to do one earlier, but if some of you guys are following along, I kind of think it's nice to have it live so that I don't go, and here's one I made earlier, and everyone goes, oh great, well I'm still cutting stuff out. Like wind everybody up. Okay, so I'm going to cut away on the black line. Just move some of this stuff as I go. And these are almost like my little templates for what the patchwork is going to look like when I finish. So it's not going to be the size that I cut my shapes out, because otherwise my design's going to get really, really wee. And we are cutting all of these shapes out of our interfacing and then our corresponding shapes out of fabric as well, in order to, we're going to make sure we're going to keep a 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way around the outside. So that means the entire thing is going to grow by a margin of 1 centimetre. And it doesn't always mean that the shape sort of stays the same size, only a percentage bigger in comparison to some of the other pieces. So things that are triangles, they kind of end up longer and things like that. So it's quite important that you add that 1 centimetre. I've got to give myself a little bit of space here. In order for your seam allowance, and don't worry that when you're sewing things back together, some things might seem longer than others, because that's just the nature of how it goes. Okay, so you guys are going to probably have a bit more space than I do. Don't need that anymore. So I've cut my shapes out. Here they are, and I remember how they go back together, and if I don't, you guys are going to tell me, so that's pretty good. There's an A3 piece of iron-on interfacing in each kit. This is a stiffener made to make your fabric easier to work with and keep straight while you sew. Take your cut paper shapes and draw around each one onto the interfacing, adding a 1 centimetre border all the way around each one. Now, the interfacing, I'll tell you now, but it does go on to say it again in the instructions. It's something that irons onto fabric and kind of is activated with heat. It's like a glue. One side is entirely coated with glue. Now that means at this point, because the designs are reversible, it doesn't matter what side you draw on. But when it comes to ironing, it really does. So you kind of want to make sure you're familiar, and get the lights on in the room if you can't see very well. You want to make sure you're familiar with which side is the glue side. All right, so I'm looking now. You won't be able to probably see. No, it's not going to pick it up on camera. But there's a much more reflective pearlescent side on one side than the other. So if I'm looking, I can tell that the coated side, the really gluey side, is on the side that's like slightly pearlescent, and the side that is mattified and hasn't really got a lot going on, that's without the glue. So that's the side that we're going to iron onto. I'll just grab a pencil. So one thing I didn't arm myself with. Wait, there we go. I love it. Didn't even read my own instructions. And look, I've got another block colour. This is from my friend Emrys as well. You can see what his aesthetic is, all speckly. Okay. So I'm going to take my piece of interfacing. Doesn't matter which side I lay it on the ironing board at the moment, because we're not doing any ironing yet. And I'm going to draw around my shapes with a 1 centimetre. I wonder if I can like tilt this so you can sort of see. Oh my God, I can. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to draw around this with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now, I've got my measuring tape to measure, but I'm not going to do it because I'm really lazy. But if you wanted to be very accurate, you would want to get your measuring tape out and do a little measure. I feel pretty confident about that. I'll maybe take a bit off there. 1 centimetre all the way around. We're going for speed here. Well, certainly I am, because I've got about 30 minutes left. We'll get 30 minutes into our patchworking. Okay, so I'm cutting out my pieces, and I might even just sort of, if I was going a bit slower, I might pin them together, but I'll just pile them up. So, and you'll find often that things can like fit really nicely and snugly together. Like, let's see, that is nearly the right size. And also, because I've left a 1 centimetre seam allowance, I can kind of guarantee that that is going to be a similar width. There we go. Cutting my shapes. Love it. All right, 3 more to go. Let's see. I might draw them on and cut them all at the same time. All right, so that seam allowance is going to come into play when we are stitching our fabrics together. It means that there's enough kind of hanging over that we can press flat and iron back. If we were trying to stitch these all together far too close, you know, without a seam allowance, without a seam, I mean, where would we be? You wouldn't manage it, would you? You'd kind of be binding fabrics together, and you'd see all the edges, and there'd be fraying everywhere, and it would come apart. It'd be awful. So we need that seam allowance whenever we're doing any sewing, to make sure there's a little lip of fabric left over for us to stitch things together and leave enough going on inside the garment or behind the object that we've made, meaning that it's not going to kind of unravel and undo our stitching. So you'll find seam allowances in everything that you stitch, unless you're kind of doing some sort of like really wild applique. And they're really vital to the construction of the piece. Now check this out. I've got my interfacing. Oh, that's left over. Isn't that great? So these are like great value little kits. You're going to have a lot to work with. And it means that, you know, it's stuff like this I kind of like going over on some of the more difficult to buy parts of the kit. So if you are going to be doing some more of your own patchworking, you can probably find fabrics around the house. Anything that's, you know, deemed to go in the charity shop bin, you can just keep that to one side. We're going to tilt you back now. You can chuck it to one side and actually be like, I'm going to use this for my patchworking. But it's the interfacing that you might find a bit of a job to buy, especially at the moment. So there's look how much is left over in the kit. I think this design definitely uses up more, but as it goes, I've actually just been really fantastic value for you guys. All right, so we'll put that to one side. I'm not going to need the interfacing anymore. Let's see what the instructions say next. And at this point, we'll have a little sip of the wine as well. How are you guys doing? We've got a couple of people in the room at the moment watching me patchwork. Oh, it just makes me want to like do a quilt or a whole like patchwork bedspread for winter. Something I was saying to my mum, I was like, please, can we like do a family quilt? So cute. So give me a little blue heart in the comments if you like the idea of doing some patchwork and you think you might even start some this winter. Oh, I would just love us all to be doing a patchwork together. So I think we might have to do a few more of these apart from the one I'm doing on Sunday. So you should now have little interfacing shapes that are the same size as your paper pieces, only with an extra 1 centimetre edge on them. So I've got all of these here. I feel like I haven't got enough, but I definitely have. The next task is to fix these shapes onto the reverse side of your chosen patchworking fabric by ironing the interfacing shapes on with a hot iron. Make sure you don't iron the wrong side of the interfacing, as it's a bit like adhesive, so it melts with the heat. Wow. Look for the glue-coated side of the stiffener by feeling for the shiny or pearlescent side. This is the side that will be in contact with the back of your fabric, so we've been over this already, haven't we? Please note there are 2 cream fabric pieces in this kit. You need to save the bigger one till last. So I'll save my little piece of cream there. I'll put that to one side because I want to save that for the back of my fabric. Maybe all the things we're going to preserve we'll put on the side of there, which includes this wadding as well. Okay, so from my kit, I'm going to pick some things to work with. Now, I know that my design is kind of like a gritty block thing like this. This one I kind of grew in colourway. So I started with a blue, dark, and I kind of went lighter and lighter. Maybe I'll try and go in reverse with this one. So the smallest piece will be cream. Oh, do you know what? Actually, I might get some of these patterns going on as well. Let's see how much I can get out of the pattern. It's kind of nice in patchwork when similar patterns and colours aren't touching one another, so that you can really see the contrasting lines of the shape and the layout that you're working with. Okay, so I've chosen my fabrics. I'm now going to iron my shapes, my interfacing shapes, onto the back of my fabric. So I'm going to pick the ones I love and be like, right, okay, let's get that ironed on to there. And I've spotted that the pearlescent side, the one that's got all the glue on, is here. So that's the one that I'm going to have in contact with my fabric, okay? All right. So these are all my quilting block shapes, but with a seam allowance on them. Okay, so ironing that on. Put the grubby iron down. Okay, so that's ironed on nice and fixed now. That's going to stiffen it up a bit. And it gives me a little guide for where to cut as well. And I reckon I'll do this one. And then maybe I'll use the same fabric again for my super long one if it'll fit. Oh, I don't think it will. Let's see. No, it might be too long. I'm going to use my second longest one. Oh, actually, I think I'll use that for that. There we go. All right, so I'm going to iron some more interfacing onto some of these. Check for the pearlescent side and iron it down. Okay. And it doesn't matter if you've got little pencil marks on your interfacing, because they're not going to be shown because they're on the reverse of your fabric. So that's kind of disappearing into your design, into the back of your design. It's actually it's quite quick, you know. Let's have a look. So let's try some other colours. Oh, I'm going to go with reds and pinks. So I'm going to take a red. I'm still ironing my interfacing on. Let's do the nice big block with that. And again, always checking that my design is on, my glue is going to be coming into contact with the fabric and not coming into contact with my iron, because can you imagine? No thanks. All right. And I think a lot of this live as well is just going to be me sat sewing, so I'll have to have a little chat about how our lockdowns are going. Oh, my patchwork pieces so far. Look at these colours that I've got going on. It's great. Look at that. Oh my God, so cool. I'm loving that. Let's go for, I've got 2 more pieces left. So the bigger one I'm going to do in this colour. Kind of like how it's pulling the yellow out. And all of my little patchy block pieces that I cut out earlier, I can put them to one side and save them now. You could do all of your blocks using those little squares, which I think is really cool. So in your kit, you can kind of save all the scraps that you're using, and nice and useful for future stuff then. You could do your whole quilt just using the stuff in this kit. All you need to buy, well, it's like the tools, isn't it? All you need to buy is the fabric and then probably the quilting, the wadding that's going to go in it. Right, so just to economise, I'm going to use it like that. Okay, lining on, cutting out. Lovely. really liking the colours that are coming out of this. Yeah, really kind of like warm. And last one, tiny little square. I think I'm going to do that one in the pink. Yeah, that's cute. I tried not to go too cute with the colours in this kit. So when I was buying them, I was actually in a fabric shop down in Bournemouth. And I was like, what am I going to need? And I wanted to do, oh, and I'll put an image up later actually of the quilt that inspired this colour palette. But I didn't want to go too adorable. It's always my tendency to do things a bit cute. And I was like, no, let's get some sophisticated dark colours in there. So I've got pink, she says, sophisticated. So I've got all of my patchwork pieces cut out now. And you can see how much stiffer they are. They're like really easy to work with. Oh, Tina says morning. So Tina's over in New Mexico, aren't you, Tina? Tina's coming live from New Mexico. And it's like 6 o'clock in the evening here, Tina. So you can follow along with our like evening patchworking. I've got my wine on the go and you're probably having your orange juice. So we've got all our pieces cut out. Let's see what the kit says to do next. Now you have stiffened shapes ready to sew together into your block design. It will help you to do this in the order pictured, as then the construction can grow in an organic way. To sew 2 pieces together, pair them up facing one another. So let's do a bit of that. Now I can see from my design, I've got like little arrows, I've got little arrows on the go telling me which ones to do first, which ones to do second, because if you do that, it just makes it a lot easier to make it grow. You kind of want the thing to sort of blossom outwards like that. With this particular design, if I was to try and sew from the biggest pieces going smaller, I'd be in a situation where I was kind of sewing that there, but then I would have to try and sew that one to that piece and that piece at the same time. So you really only ever want to be joining 2 sides at a time. You don't want to kind of get a third one involved. So for that reason, I'm going to start with my 2 smallest pieces, just like the instructions say. I'm going to join that one together first, and we're doing some really straightforward stitching. So I'm going to take my 2, you can't see it unless it's back here. That's the back of both of my fabrics. I'm going to take the front, I don't know why I mentioned the back then, I'm going to take the fronts, that's the front of both my fabrics. I'm going to take the fronts and have them facing one another to sew them. And then I'm going to do a lovely stitched line that's 1 centimetre away from the edge, because that's what I want my seam allowance to be. And you'll note that from the cutting that we did earlier, it means that your block will be the same size as the piece you're sewing. So I'm going to go 1 centimetre from the edge and stitch all the way along there. Let's get that started. For that, I'm going to need to grab my needle and my needle off my card, handy. If you guys are one of the subscribers, you'll probably be starting to amass a lovely little haberdashery collection now, because I send you the stuff every month. I don't let anyone go without, so you may have had some needles from some other kits. That's cool. All right, so I'm going to thread my needle and I'm going to stitch 1 centimetre away from the edge. Now, if you're worried about holding things in place, you could always use one of the pins that's in the kit to pin it, so that it doesn't shuffle around while you're sewing. And if you're still nervous about that 1 centimetre line, you can draw that in with your pencil. You could do a 1 centimetre line across there. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to go in and out of the same place a couple of times. Some people make knots by tying a knot in their fabric, in their thread. But I always get a bit worried that knots are going to come undone. And so my mum taught me, and you'll see here I'm stitching. Do you know what? I'm going to draw it just for accuracy and good practice. I'm going to draw my 1 centimetre line all the way across the back of my fabric. So you can see that on there. That's where I know my seam allowance is going to be, so I'm going to stitch along there. And I'm only stitching on one side. So to start, I just get my first stitch done, and then I stitch in the same place a couple of times. I never do any knots. Whoops. Oh, might be knotting itself for me already, look. Haha. There we go. And this is where I recline and start drinking my wine and things. Okay. So I do my... Oh yeah, look, it really is knotting up. So I stitch in the same place a couple of times to like anchor it. And then I go along my 1 centimetre line. I'm just doing a running stitch, which is where you go in and out of the fabric, probably leaving you know, maybe like a 3mm gap in between, maybe a little bit less. But that's how I'm going to bond my fabrics together with stitch. Nice and neat. And I've got the fabric pinned in place so that it's not shuffling around anywhere while I stitch along that drawn line. Okay, and this is going to be when my patchwork joins, this is me shrinking the squares to size, getting rid of that 1 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so that was nice and snappy. How are we doing for time? Probably got about 20 minutes left, and I can't imagine that I'm going to finish the whole kit in that time, but I'm thinking that with the live that we're doing on Sunday, it's an opportunity to pick up again, and I might continue it then. So I've stitched my line like that. Lovely. I can unpin it, and because I've gone in and out of the same place at the very end as well, knotting it up again means I can snip it away and not worry that it's going to come undone. Okay, so there's my 2 pieces stitched together now. If I open them out, they're lovely and joined. And look, bonded together, 2 different types of patchwork. So if I just tilt my camera again, this is going to like eventually fall out of its little holder, I can tell. So here I've got the 2 bonded together. Now I'm going to do something called ironing the seam open. Okay, so this is where I'm going to sort of get my fingers to open out that seam, and you can see the 2 parts there. Look, cute, right? There's my fabric at the front. I'm going to iron that flat to give me a really nice, neat finish. It's not just kind of accurate and lovely looking. It also means that as I grow this construction, there's not going to be like a big bulk of fabric behind, you know, one side of the patchwork and not on the other. So I've ironed my seams open by opening them out at the back and giving it a little iron. And I think there is a bit of instruction about that in the kit as well. Have a little look. I've kind of like raced ahead. Once you've sewn your join, you need to do something called ironing the seams open. This makes your design lay flat and makes the whole thing easier to stitch as it grows. To do this, simply open out each seam on the back. So that's what's known as opening out the seams. You're kind of, so bright in here. You're sort of like pressing them open and ironing them flat. Open up the seams on the back of the piece and press it flat with the iron, revealing the join on the back of the piece. This also comes into play when you're doing your quilting, because to quilt things, we're going to put wadding behind it, and I think that's something we will cover on Sunday. You're going to put the wadding behind it, and then you're going to stitch in and out of your seam. So you're going to do a stitch all the way along there. And it really helps if you've ironed it out, because actually all that's really in between that is a bit of air. Can you see that? You held it up to the light, you'd spot, you can almost see things through it. So that's a very, very shallow area of your design. You'll be able to pass the needle really easily in and out, and makes it easier to do that when you're quilting. So ironing the seams open is the one. We love a bit of that. When you've slowly built up your design to a completed block, this is how far we've got, guys, in 40 minutes. This is when you would begin a new one and eventually stitch them all together. Instead, we're going to finish this one on its own to make a mini quilt sample for you to learn the techniques, also useful as a pot holder. Okay, so at this point, I'm just going to carry on building up the blocks. So we've got those 2 done. Now I'm going to join it to this one, because at this point the instructions are like, just keep going, keep sewing. So again, I'm going to put the 2 faces together, and I'm going to pin them to make life so much easier for myself. Let's get the pins going on. And I'm going to draw that 1 centimetre seam allowance so that I don't have to think about what a centimetre is while I'm stitching. I can just do it. I'm going to put my pencil. Oh, I've lost it. Come on little guy. There he is. Should have like a nice little pencil necklace, shouldn't I? That'd be handy. Okay, so I'm going to create my 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way along, like that. And with needle and thread. Oh, I hope my lovely colleague Lucy is still watching, because she'll know that it's at times like this I think about Joy, the technician. Joy, I think of Joy, but also Joy is the name of the lovely lady and colleague that I work with at UCA in Canterbury, and she runs the sewing department. She is the boss lady of the sewing room, and she's just like, you say to her, Joy, do you have a needle? And she'd be like, she's like, whip it out of her body. She's got like pads and sleeves and things around her neck and toggles and all sorts. It's great. And at times like this, it reminds me just how useful those kind of things are. Oh gosh, look, I'm getting real knotty tonight with my thread. Okay, so I'm going in and out of the same place to anchor myself again, so that I don't have to tie a knot. I'm kind of anchoring that thread this way. And then I'm going to go along the drawn line that's going to generate my seam allowance. And because we've got the interfacing on this kit, it is quite tough to sew through. It's tougher than just your average piece of fabric, but it's going to make your quilted panel really durable and also make it really, really crisp. So in the kits for the subscribers, I included a thimble as well, so that if anyone feels like they don't want to force it through with their finger, they've got their thimble to work with too. And you can do kind of quite, because this is a constructed fabric, it's kind of like a composed, built surface that's going to be stitched to something else. You actually don't have to do like really, really super tiny stitches for this. I'm going quite big for speed, but also once I iron those seams open and I'm stitching the thing down, these joins themselves don't really make up too much of the structural composition, which I think is quite cool. So you don't want to do things that are too monster, but you don't have to have stitches that are going to kind of like be responsible for keeping the whole thing together all the time. You know, it's not got to take a lot of, they're not going to be stress points, as it were, because they're going to be ultimately stitched to something else as well. All right, so I've done all my sewing. I've sewn another 2 pieces together now to make 3. I take my pins out and do a little finishing stitch. All right, I might just get this patchwork done, you know, and then we will definitely spend Sunday doing our finishing, which is such a nice little division of time, isn't it? On the Friday night we do the patchwork, and on the Sunday we do the quilting. Okay, so I've snipped away my thread, and now look at that, guys, this is a patchwork panel. We are patchworking. Once again, I'm going to iron that seam open so that it's nice and flat, because otherwise it's kind of doing this, isn't it? It's like a little book. But we want it to be like a lovely flat fabric. So I'm going to iron that out. And when I say ironing the seams open, you can see my lovely messy ironing board again. Got to get a nice cover on this. Maybe I'll make that tonight. I'm going to iron that seam open. And I'll do it on the other side as well, which is why you need to make sure your iron's nice and clean, because otherwise you get all these lovely bumps. Mine's not very clean because I use it for all sorts of fabric, wood veneers, everything. Okay, look at that. Isn't that great? And that would be like, even that on its own would be such a super cute like little pocket. And this, honestly, oh, thanks for your cheers, Tina, I love that. The patchworking is one of the, in my mind, one of the only true ways of upcycling. You're taking something that is of a lower material value, and by material I don't mean fabric, I mean as a component in any kind of constructed thing. It's of low value because it's so small, you can't do very much with that, but you are joining it and bonding it with other things to make the surface area grow. So I go from a scrap that's that tiny and I create something that can then make a whole jacket. Like, that's definitely upcycling. You're pushing a material component up the scale of its possibilities of use, which is just so cool. So when I first learned about upcycling and was like really interested in all of that and wanted to change the world with it, that was something I was quite concerned about, you know, how actually a lot of things are called upcycling, but all they do is reuse things and push them down the recycling, you know, like the system of stuff means that if you're reusing things, if you're turning a bed sheet into a dress, fantastic, but what you're actually doing is you're cutting that piece of fabric up so small that eventually one day someone's going to turn it into something else, and we're going to have a pile of thread on the ground, because you can't keep cutting something and increase its material value or its surface area for it to be useful to other things. Whereas with patchworking, you really are. We'll chop things up, or we take things that are chopped up and we fuse them together and bond them and make them something that's so much bigger that you can make more things out of it than you could make the original. Even furniture, you know, my furniture is described as upcycling, but I'm screen printing onto it, I'm sanding it, I'm painting it every time. I'm lowering the potential reuse of that object through my process. It's making it more valuable, some would argue. I hope they would argue that. And it's certainly something that like increases it in value and maybe extends its life cycle, but it's not necessarily growing the number of future uses of that object. And that's something I feel really strongly about. So patchworking, I find, is like one of the only original, true, honest ways of upcycling. And so it remains like really close to my heart as someone who actually cares a lot about the material value of the objects that I'm using and making. And you know, even I kind of recognize that I'm slowly degrading something, not culturally, not financially, but certainly material value. I'm stripping it a little bit more every time, and so is the person after me, and so is the person after me, and in the end we have a pile of dust instead of a piece of furniture. So that's something I think about quite a lot. Okay, so I've got my piece of patchwork there, and I'm now sewing on another panel. So exciting. I love this, guys. But actually I'm doing a patchwork panel in the period of time that we're doing this live. So I'm going to once again find my pencil and draw my little 1 centimetre line. I've only got to do this a few times before I've actually got quite a large piece going on. And I'm following the instructions to stitch the panel in the sequence that it says in the instructions. And that way it can kind of like slowly grow in a really easy to deliver way. Whereas if I was to try and stitch it sort of with two sides together that don't match in size, I might find that I've then got a square to kind of fit into a little nook, which, I mean, I don't even know how you do that. It's quite hard. So it's very important that you follow the sequence of the stitching together, and you're always kind of like matching material pieces that have like measurements. Yeah. But I've made that really easy to do with this kit by actually numbering the sequence in which you have to stitch. So you start with 1 and then you sew it to 2, and you know, it's like, this is the join you want to stitch first, this is the join you want to stitch second. Okay. So none of this is too taxing or too strange in its practicality. So these are definitely kits that are great for people that kind of like the look of patchworking and might want to start. And if you think about how much I've talked during this live, and I've still nearly managed to do like a little patchwork panel very quickly. I mean, I'm talking a lot. And once you get the hang of it, you get to grow these really quickly. You almost do it, you know, without the instructions. As with most things when we're getting to know stuff. Become an expert, and then you're like, I don't need this little pink page anymore. I can do this on my own. That's kind of how I'm vibing right now. I'm like, oh, I've read that. Yeah, I wrote it. I don't need this. But it's nice to follow it all the same so that you guys can see that it's really helpful. All right, so I'm about halfway through this one. So I've seen some amazing things being made out of patchwork this season. Definitely jackets. I'm going to put some of them up on Instagram. And I follow 2 incredible quilters as well that I'm going to share later tonight that are just so inspiring for patchwork, and not only make things that are really snuggly and lovely to use at home, but also incredible art pieces as well. And it's one of those textiles, oh, I've just done a stitch with my unthreaded needle. It's one of those textile objects that is so domestic, and yet at the same time, probably for that reason, ends up appearing in art quite a lot as well, because it really speaks of the home, you know, and being comforted and being loved and being looked after, and having an object that people who know you have made for you over a really long period of time. You don't get patchwork quilts in the high street because they're too expensive to make. Like, if you have a patchwork quilt, it's because someone who cares about you took the time to make something for you, and I think that's really special. So it means a lot, these things, you know, even just to a small degree. It's an object that represents a lot of time of, you know, and construction hours So I think that's really great. Love textiles for that. They mean so much. All right, so I've got my patchwork panel coming along now. I love the look of that. Look at that gold. So good. I'm going to iron the seam open again. So that's where I'm going to use the iron to press open those seams on the back. It's going to travel all the way down there and get that all flat. And again, really useful for later on when I'm starting to stitch the backing fabric, sandwiching that wadding in between. Okay, so when you're pressing the seams open, you iron the back and then you iron the front as well. All right. Cool, loving that. Just kind of reading the comments as I go. Who is in the room at the moment who's got one of the kits? Give me a little orange heart. Tina, I know you'll have one for sure. I sent one all the way across the pond. Now here's a really little interesting part, right? I was just about to stitch that onto there to make my design, my little kind of chevroned shape. But I could choose, if I wanted to freestyle it completely, I could choose to stitch it on this side and suddenly it's going to be more of like a square that contains a little block. Now that would be so different, like that would create such a different quilt. I mean, you know, you're probably like, not that dramatically, but Victoria wants to know, do I need to worry about the steam setting on my iron? I don't think you do, you know, because it might interact with the glue a little bit on the interfacing, but to be honest, the interfacing, once it gets involved, you know, and you're stitching things together, it's not too much of a worry if it comes away. But if I were you, I'd turn it off. I don't tend to ever use steam on my iron because I don't know why. I tend to spray water on the location rather than using it in the iron. Partly because it just drips everywhere. Whenever I'm using it, I'm like, oh, why is there water coming out my iron? It's probably the cheap irons I buy. But that's a great question, Vicky. Okay, so that is how I'm going to get mine to look. So I'm going to stitch those two bits together. How are we doing for time? Oh, probably got about like 5 minutes. So let's see if I can get this patchwork finished by the time we finish our live. And then if you guys jump on again at 12 o'clock midday on Sunday, that's when I'm going to use this one. I might just do one demo of like sewing two bits together and then I'll be like, here's one I made earlier in true Blue Peter style. Oh, I would have been great on Blue Peter, wouldn't I? If only it was still on now, I would be just like signing myself up. I feel like everyone would be signing me up for me, you know, it'd be like, you need to get this girl on your show. She is always blimmin' presenting everything. Actually, they're quite organised though, aren't they? This whole, here's one I made earlier. I never do any of that. So actually, maybe I'd sort of fail at the first hurdle. The interview questions for Blue Peter would be, question number 1, how much have you prepared earlier? And I would say, nothing. Do you have anything you've made earlier, Zoe? No. Zoe, what were you doing earlier? Something else. Were you doing this? Were you making another version of this? No, I wasn't. I'll go, no, you're not for us then, sorry. Okay, so I'm drawing my 1 centimetre seam allowance across there. They're getting bigger and bigger now, so they're taking longer and longer to stitch. But I mean, this is it, right? You could be doing this while watching television. Now, how much do we love that idea? Sitting in front of the TV at Christmas, slowly, steadily creating a patchwork block, one every evening before you've got like, you know, 50, it's not 50 evenings over Christmas, but there's 36 days till Christmas, you know. So if you were going to do like maybe a 30-piece quilt, good time to start, I reckon. And then a couple of days to sew it up for your loved one. There we go, perfect. Love it. It's a great little present. Imagine giving someone a quilt for Christmas or a little baby quilt. So cool. It really shows that you've thought about someone if you take that time to do it, I reckon. And if you haven't got time to potentially put a whole quilt together for someone, oh look, a patchworking kit that you can give them instead and be like, I wanted you to have this, or I wanted you to make me a quilt, so here I got you this patchworking kit. It shows you how to patchwork and it shows you how to turn that patchwork into a mini little micro quilt so that you can learn how to do it and make one for me. And it's kind of like that nice heritage craft as well, isn't it? That, you know, I think it's really important to be learning in this day and age because they've lasted this long. It's like, we don't want quilts and patchworking to go out of fashion. They're so like fundamental for not only reusing fabrics, but also like a really, really rich history that's so great. So I love the idea of like sharing this stuff as well, so that
teenagers can get into quilting, and we can start to see it on like Depop or Depop or whatever they're all using to sell their stuff. Yeah, I really love it. And I think I might try and really get my own textile students a bit more engaged with it as well, because it's a great example of how like important the nuances of design are in the construction of an object that you're making in textiles. Because like I'm saying in my block suggestions that I have in the kit, this is the one I didn't use, but there's another one that I did use tonight. It depends on how you organize the colors and locate those colors in the block, that and actually how you even stitch the blocks together, that determine how the thing is going to look. It's so, you know, it's entirely up to you, and it's different for every person. So I just think that's really fab, and it creates a situation where the thing that you're making can have so much ownership, which isn't always the case with a lot of designs. You know, if you're doing embroidery, it's different, isn't it? Because embroidery is kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to follow this design that Zoe's given me, and I'm going to stitch those lines in the way she told me to. And that's really good as well, because sometimes people like to hand over the control to someone else. There we go, stitched it. I'm just going to iron it flat before we do like a lovely little reveal. But those things are much more controlled by the person who designed the kit. But in this instance, whoever's doing this stitching, it's like, well, you get to pick the order this is going to go in. And the really wonderful thing about that as well is that it looks great no matter what you do. Like, it's always going to look like a fab organised piece of patchwork, no matter what order you decide to sew these together in. So it belongs to you, but I've helped you make it smart. That's the point. Okay, all right, look at that. My little patchwork panel. Gosh, you know, this could start to be, knocking things over there. This could start to be like elements of a garment really quickly. Now, do you know what I love about things like this, like unexpected, unusual locations of like very traditional textiles? I love the idea of like getting a jumper or something, like a hoodie, and putting this on the inside of the hood, or having this as like swapping out the sleeves, so unstitching the sleeves, putting the cuffs maybe back on, but then designing all of the sleeves to be like made out of patchwork and stuff like that. So very cool. Now I've made this one tonight, and obviously I had some of my earlier ones. This is one I made the other day with some of the plain fabrics, and I did that without the interfacing, because you don't need to use the interfacing in it if you don't want to. I just think here's a good example actually. You can see this one's like, well, I've just ironed it so it's quite stiff, but it's very floppy, and sewing that together will collapse quite a lot, whereas my patchwork piece here is quite stiff and really kind of held its own. So I could now choose to stitch these together in some really interesting ways. Look, oh yeah, because these are the same block. So that, they look so different, don't they? Even though it's exactly the same pattern. Oh, Becky's in the room. Becky said they are the same colours as your picture behind you. They are, look. Oh my gosh, yeah, look. Look at that, we've even got a bit of floral. Now, don't you just love the idea of like, you could be like, think about the colours of someone's house or someone's room, or, you know, it could represent stuff. Like, this is your favourite picture, so I made you a quilt to match. How cool would that be? Oh, love it. Really great. So this is the point where, if I had quite a few going on, now maybe I would sew these together and start to create something that grew into a larger piece of fabric. And because the live will be finishing soon, I'm going to pretty much end up there. And next time on Sunday, oh, I love this, it's like two-parters now. Next time on Sunday, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to take my patchwork panel, and I'm going to be taking my other fabrics in the kit, which are the leftovers now. It's, well, not the leftovers that I haven't used yet. It's the wadding that's going to get sandwiched in behind the fabric of the patchwork panel that I've made. And I'm going to back all of it with some of this lovely cream that I've put in the kit as well. So we've got everything there. So what I'll be doing is I'll pinning those together, and I'll start to stitch through the two, in and out, from the front to the back to the front again. And I might do that in a really neat way by going in between the edges, or I might do that in a really dramatic spiral interesting way. We'll have to see what I feel like on Sunday. Whoops. We'll be stitching them together to generate a little patchwork block like this one, And then I'll show you all live how to stitch the edging on to make it look a bit like that. There's lots of different ways of doing these edges, but the one I'm showing you is really, really straightforward. It's just where you kind of like wrap it round and stitch from the front to the back while holding it in place with the pins. Or in this case, I've kind of stitched the front and then I'll stitch the back afterwards, securing it on. But there's other ways to do it where you kind of iron this out and sew it on with as if it's the seam allowance and all sorts. It's really quite complicated and very, very, very neat. But I think as beginners, it's good to sort of start with this just bonding of it. You can't see it in this light. I need to dim the lights a bit. And you can see on the back what I've done is I've stitched using my white thread, but you can't see it because I've done such a neat job. I stitched through my seams, which I ironed open so it makes it really easy. I've stitched through my seams, through all of the wadding and the fabric and everything, and come through onto the other side. Look at that lovely quilting. And that's what quilting is. You kind of get this punctured look on the fabric, and the parts where it's not sewn, they puff up because of the wadding. So that in total, let's take some of these pins out so I don't stab myself too much, starts to make an adorable kind of like blankety thing. Now that, it'd be so snuggly, I've got to sit back so you can see it better. It'd be so snuggly if that was like my entire blanket. And you can see, this is what the second design in the kit makes. So imagine like loads of tiles like that. Or you could join together ones that are mismatching, but in the same colours. That'd be very cool as well. Where's the one I just made? This one here. Cool, getting some of the floral going on as well. Love that. Awesome. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there for this evening. Unless you guys have got any questions you want to put in the chat box, I'll be back on again on Sunday at midday, where I'll be showing everyone how to make a more quilted version of their patchwork after having made their little blocks. And don't forget, something as small as this could grow into a huge, huge quilt that you give away to someone you love or you snuggle up under in the winter months. And I love a bit of that. So I'm actually kind of strong-arming my own mum into making loads and loads of these with me. Maybe I'll pick out, like some pinks and some mustards for my bedroom would be very cool. She's got to see what she wants for her house as well. And we're going to make one together so that like no matter what period of my life, whether she's, still alive or not, I'm going to have something that we got to make together over the winter of probably the weirdest year in the world, right? And that's, I think, what's really special about this kit. Like, I love making these things for you guys, sending them out to you, getting us all crafting together, sharing all the stuff that you make. But this one's a real opportunity to actually generate stuff that kind of becomes a bit of a family heirloom or even leaves a bit of a legacy. So that's a big deal. Like paintings, similar sort of thing, but really like a patchwork thing that you learn to do from a little kit like this, you can end up like creating something that's going to outlive you and keep your relatives warm. Like, oh my God, I just think that's fantastic. And it's, using up and saving all the little scraps of fabric that are useless, like something that tiny. What are we going to use that for? Like, I save these things, right? Here's my bag. Oh my God, look. This is just one of the bags of stuff I've got. And look, scraps of, I just saw a bit, scraps of the Ankara fabric, the Dutch wax cloth print. Like, what am I going to do with that? Yeah, I might make actually a really nice hairband, but I could be patchworking these things into really incredible, really detailed pieces of work and saving all those textiles from going in the bin or just sitting under my desk all the time. So I think that's really special. And I know a lot of people that have made incredible pieces using shirts from family members, like granddads, clothing, turn them into blankets to kind of keep with them. And they store so easily, and yet at the same time, there's something that can be really close to you when you need it to be. So I love that. It's so special. Anyway, so let's have a look at the chat. It all looks so lovely and so achievable. You'll be a quilter by Sunday evening. Yes, you will, Vicky. I love it. I love it. You definitely will. And Becky says she takes envelopes and cut them into cards that people keep. Oh yeah, you do. Becky does some like incredible little gift cards and note cards, so you can have a look on her site to have a look at that as well. Becky Emery on the chat. And I really want to see if you guys have got any quilts, anything in your home that is quilted, patchworked, an heirloom piece. I want to see it. I'm like so excited to see the kind of like share the ones that we've got already. I'll show you guys some of the ones that I have. My lovely friend Lois, I'm going to get her revealing some of the ones that she has too. And yeah, I just think it's like so cool to see that kind of stuff in people's households, and it's stuff we can aspire to do. So, you know, let's all become pro patchworkers. On Sunday, I'm going to see if let's see if I've got my actual studio done around the corner. That'd be very exciting. And I'm actually going to see if we can sort of be curled up with a lovely cup of tea. I've got my wine at the moment and my crisps for tea, but on Sunday I'm going to get super cozy with it. Maybe I'll even get my patchwork blanket and curl up in that. That'd be cool, wouldn't it? Okay, right, I'm going to end there so I can save my live and repost it. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Share with me what you're up to if you get going on your patchworking, or if you're doing one of the other kits. I want to hear all about it. And thanks for joining. See you on Sunday.